Am I the asshole for not talking to my childhood friend of 20 plus years because she hasn't been a good girlfriend to my other close friend who I met through her? Long post? This situation obviously has lots of layers to it, so buckle down, y'all. For clarity, I'm going to call my childhood friend Apple and my close friend / her girlfriend Banana. Apple and I were best friends when we were little for a few years until I moved out of town with my mom. Eventually, we got back into contact and became long-distance besties right away for the rest of our adolescence. We shared a lot of things, like haircut trips to maintain our pixie cuts, original characters that we bashed together like Barbies, tears, laughs, the works. She was a huge part of my life up until a few years ago. When we were /15 YRS old, she introduced me to her girlfriend, Banana, who I hit it off with right away. We three eventually became inseparable. We bonded over anime, cartoons, movies, our art and creativity. From early on, I noticed the tension in their relationship, me being the professional third wheel and all. They would get into tiffs, riddle the space with an awkward silence, and Apple would usually continue on like normal while Banana sulked. As you can tell, the foundation of the relationship, at least from my perspective, was partially built on this lack of conflict resolution. Apple typically expected Banana to be on the same page as her to keep the peace, but Banana also didn't stand up for herself. Conflict was basically treated like it was taboo rather than something to work through together. Later on, Apple asks for an open relationship and for the two of them to try out polyamory. From the get-go, Banana wasn't enthusiastically on board, past trauma contributing to this. Her girlfriend prior to Apple also asked for a poly relationship before promptly cheating on her, and then telling her, "I forgot we were dating so I'm with someone else now." Diabolical teenager behavior. Despite it all, Banana was so in love with Apple that they'd try anything for their happiness. Boyfriend after boyfriend, Apple would date, break up, and Banana would be their emotional crutch until another one came along. And like many things, it really started to fall apart when quarantine came in 2020. This particular boyfriend of Apple's, I'll call him Orange, moved in with her and this was done without Banana's knowledge or permission. Unethical polyamory, aka cheating, right? Orange eventually broke up with Apple and it was the only time she was broken up with and the messiest too. I sat there and watched Apple spill out her feelings about her heartbreak right in front of Banana, saying the words, "I've never loved someone like I loved him." I watched the feeling of dejection take over Banana's face, Apple's girlfriend of 5 years at the time, while Apple was overcome with grief for someone else. Fast forward to /2022, Apple and I's friendship has started to take a bad turn but I was still trying to manage. We had always struggled with good communication. I was a texter and wanted to keep in touch this way, she's not a texter and could only keep up with messages with her mom more than anyone. This was a problem for me for a long time, especially in college, because Banana and Apple were some of my only friends. I was a bit too dependent on my contact with them and it hurt when I didn't hear from them, especially in the group chat with us three and I'm the only one talking. The most confusing part for me was how Apple would always boast about how much she loved me, how much she missed me when I was out of town, how much she cared about our friendship, how our relationship was one of the most important to her, how nothing would ever separate us again when I moved to town. Yet, you can't reply to a text? Even when I'm trying to make plans? I would give updates about my life and hear crickets. These things would be fine if it didn't feel like pulling teeth every time I'd try to just have contact or make plans with someone claiming to be my best friend and soul sister. I felt ignored, unimportant, forgotten about. I've grown up even since then and understand more the need to not always be available, but it was more than that. So much more. Not to mention how she treated me and my girlfriend when we got together in 2022, when she told me word for word, "It sucks to see you in the honeymoon phase again, it's like you can only focus on whoever you're dating." I'm sorry for getting into a happy relationship for the first time ever, after ending an abusive 7-year relationship the year before. Everyone theorizes that she just hated my attention not being on her and I agree, because it also added to it that my girlfriend always saw through her bullshit. Face with hand over mouth. Eventually, Apple confides in me about her relationship with Banana and tells me she thinks she no longer loves or is in love with Banana. At the time, I took it as a sign that she'd break up with her soon, but this never happened and as far as I'm aware, she has never, ever told Banana about these feelings. Later that same year, I sit her down for an official conversation about how I feel about their relationship. I tell her, "You told me some time ago you don't love her anymore, and it shows in how you treat her." She takes a deep breath and asks if I have any examples, and I give her two, with / details / not much comes from this conversation because I find out later how she really feels about it amidst one of our confrontations. I kept trying to save the friendship, right? I could feel it going downhill, filled with resentments, and I was trying to communicate about our crumbling communication and my feelings properly about it all. Oh yeah, and I always initiated our conversations and heart-to-hearts, never her, even when she'd tell me she's been wanting to. Granted, I was inexperienced with healthy confrontation, so I didn't go about it very well, and she did not respond well. I never felt like our conversations came to any good conclusion or solved anything. Especially when she tells me things like you dropped that bomb on me about me and Banana when I was trying to be a good friend and say, hey, maybe you're not good for each other. Claiming I'm dropping bombs when she was the one who expected me to keep it secret that she no longer loved Banana. Fast forward again to sometime last year, 2024. I'm at my wit's end with Apple and our friendship is reduced to pleasantries, birthday party invites, and a singular snap streak. We rarely even saw each other anymore. Banana and I, however, sort of reconnect after all of my confrontations with Apple. I confess that I made the mistake of lumping her in with Apple. It was always a fear of mine that if Apple and I were fighting, Banana would always stay on Apple's side, and I wouldn't blame her, that's her GF, so I distanced myself to protect myself from that pain. In reality, Banana was also distant only because of things going on in her life too, not because her and Apple have secretly been talking shit about me like my anxiety assumed. I apologized to her for making this assumption, and that I really cared for her. I just have my issues with Apple. Banana and I start hanging out more as just the two of us since she was going through a very rough year. Her mother was undergoing cancer treatment and she was her sole caregiver, and unfortunately, Apple was not being there for her like she really needed, giving a lot more attention to her new boyfriend. Apple was going through a hard year as well, having just lost her grandfather, but it was always frustrating hearing that as an excuse for not being there for your girlfriend who is taking care of her dying mother. At some point in Banana and I's reconnection, I decide to confess that about 2 years prior, Apple told me she didn't love her anymore, and apologized for holding on to it for so long. Banana's first reaction was anger, telling me her fears were correct and wondering why she would string her along like this. I thought this was the turning point they needed, but it took a lot longer for her to process and grieve the end of the relationship. She has made huge strides, however, in being more upfront and blunt about her needs and feelings to Apple. This is when she discovered just how much Apple gaslights her to pity her and her life problems, instead of take responsibility for her lack of effort in the relationship. I know this so well because she did the exact same thing to me. And I know it continues because every time I see Banana, she has a new story for how Apple has skirted her own accountability when Banana calls her out. Now we're in 2025. Just a couple weeks ago, I checked in with Banana to ask how she was doing, and she tells me she's having trouble with Apple because she hadn't heard from her in a whole week. Apple had just finished a 2-week road trip to move her mother across the country, and she's been very distraught about the whole thing. Is that a good reason to ghost your long-term girlfriend for a week after numerous conversations about not talking to Banana enough? No, I wouldn't say so. A simple hey, sorry, going through a hard time right now, I need some time would have sufficed. After hearing this, I was fed up and reached out to Apple. Hey, why didn't you talk to Banana for a week? Just curious, I add as a cushion and to not make her feel attacked, despite it being a valid question. The next day, she responds to me with a slew of excuses about her depression because of Mother's Day and not having her mom around anymore, after spending 2 weeks straight with her, how her period was super heavy and terrible, and the only hint of self-accountability lied in the last sentence of her 2 paragraphs. I didn't realize it had been so long. All I told her was that I'm sorry it's so bad that you forgot to talk to your loved ones. Hope you feel better. She says thank you and neither of us save our snap streak that day, for the first time in over 600 days. The day after is when I update Banana on the excuses Apple had, and she tells me the night before at almost midnight, which she never hears from Apple at this hour, she sent her an apology with plenty of the excuses and reasons that she gave me too. Banana theorizes that she only sent such an apology after I called her out, because how is it that she only thought to after I asked her about it,